Welcome to Truth and Nothing But, episode 24. Is Capitalism Cap? This episode includes Mr. Chico Bean and Dr. Claud Anderson. The link to the full video is in the description. Like and subscribe there. Peace.
I am honored to be sitting here with the president of the Powernomics Corporation of America and the author of Powernomics, the national plan to empower Black America. You see it right there. Dr. Claud Anderson. It's an honor to be here with you, sir.
And it's an honor to be with you, Chico.
I appreciate you, man. Now, let's go ahead and get to it. We're going to talk about black capitalism today because I don't think that there's any better source to get some answers from than you. So let's get it on kicked off. First question, is capitalism cap?
Yes.
It is.
You know why?
Why?
Because it was built into the United States Constitution in 1789. And the United States Constitution, that was the first affirmative action plan in the entire United States. It was an affirmative action plan primarily for whites.
Whites got affirmative action first?
That was who had affirmative action was whites. Y'all don't know that.
Man, that's terrible.
That's what started affirmative action. Was whites started. In the Constitution, the amendments 1 through 12, that is an affirmative action plan for whites to give them everything they wanted, period. That's what it was for. And so when that was approved, as a matter of fact, when they wrote the Constitution, they had 57 people that came to the United States, very wealthy whites from Europe. And you all call them founding fathers. Those rich whites came here to what? To use that to make more wealth for themselves. And then out of that 57, about 54 participated in drafting the United States Constitution. 3 of them, Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, and Alexander Hamilton. And they told him, so you 3 write up the Constitution of the United States. And they wrote in there exactly, here's what we want. And what did they want? They met for a whole week in Philadelphia. And they put guards on the doors and bars on the windows so nobody could hear this discussion. Discuss how can we write a constitution that says this is an open country for freedom and opportunity for everybody. At the same time, we're talking about enslaving people and using them. And they said, here's what we do. When we write this constitution, we use very broad, ambiguous language. One for language for whites and one for black folk. Now, when they talked to use these very broad, ambiguous terms, that was for whites. When blacks, they used words that blacks couldn't figure out. 3/5 of a human being, equal to a field animals, those who are indebted, those who are obligated in the labor class. See, all that was talking about black folk. John Adams and Alexander Hamilton asked Thomas Jefferson, say, you write best. You wrote the Bill of Rights. We like that fancy language. You write it, put it together, and give it back to us. And use all those broad terms, stuff like all human beings have a God-given right to life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. They didn't went there for no damn happiness. Nobody was sailing across the river for happiness. They were coming there for impersonal enrichment.
Right.
And after he approved the Constitution, then those 3 people with the founding fathers sent out messages to all those 5 groups that had been in that race trying to get across the ocean to build a new land, and told them, send us your people. And the emphasis they used, let's put that at the bottom of the Statue of Liberty. Give us your tired, those who don't want to work anymore. Give us your poor, those who don't have any money. What England and France and 2 other countries did, they cleaned out their prisons, their mental institutions, and their almshouses with poor people and sent them to the United States.
And I bet you they didn't put that in the Hamilton play on Broadway.
No.
Left that right on out. And put none of that in there. But with that being said, well, you know, as you always talk about, 87% of wealth is locked into white society. So we are competing for 13% of the wealth.
Right.
So with the racial wage gap, is there such thing as black capitalism? Can there be black capitalism with only 13% of the wealth to be competed for?
Oh, yes, it's going to be hard to get it now. We'd have had some leadership sending us after the key things that we must have to be a competitive group in America to survive, and that is wealth. We see they didn't focus on wealth. And the only time they came close to focus on wealth was back in 1865. And that came out by some very key radical Republicans, white congressmen, who says right now our primary responsibility since we won the Civil War is to reverse the Dred Scott decision of 1857. The Dred Scott decision says that no black man has any rights that a white man is bound to respect. And what he was talking about was that you're not even citizens. And all the resources we got in this country, you're not entitled to it. Because now we're going to set up a social construct called the Constitution. And in that Constitution, it's going to decide between 2 groups of people. those who will be aligned with us and be a part of us, and those who will be in opposition to us. And so the next year, in 1790, 1 year later, Congress approved what they call the first nationalization and immigration law, which says this is a white nation, and anybody coming to this country must be white, period, or can pass by whites and be viewed as whites. And that way they'd be acceptable into the society. Black folk are non-acceptable. And so consequently, immigration laws in this country were totally opposed to black folk, who says you cannot practice capitalism so long as we're coming in and we got a right to come in, okay? And so they started bringing in immigrants from all around the world, and that's what created your problem to today.
When you say those things, like, what do you think is the best possible way for us to start to get to that point of generating black wealth?
Capitalism never existed until about the 15th century. Prior to that time, we had mercantilism all around the world. Europe was a mercantilism stretch all the way around. That's where people have just made a product, sold it. There was no system. And so every individual could go out in the mornings into the marketplace and sell his vegetables or sell whatever he wants to sell, shoes or clothes, and that was it. And so no, capitalism came out of black people. And that's why it's a little concerning to me when I hear a lot of professors, particularly on college campuses, talking about anti-capitalism. Capitalism is the best thing we got going. And the opposite of that would be socialism. Capitalism means private sector owning and controlling resources and being able to make profit. People say, well, Dr. Anderson, let's go for socialism and just push socialism where the government owns everything and they control everything and with restraints. And all the profits go straight to government. I ran that down in Cuba. Very few people own anything. Ever since about the late 1950s, there were no private businesses of any magnificence. Everything is just simply same cars have been there since 1950 are still running. Just repair the same old cars. And the few businesses that exist, you got to be close to a prince or a god to get a business in Cuba.
Wow.
And that's why most of those Cubans that came into Miami, they flew out of there right quick because they wanted to practice capitalism. So let's go back and talk about what capitalism is right fast. Now, capitalism, as you and I discussed earlier, capitalism came about because of what happened with Henry the Navigator back in the early 1400s.
Yes, sir.
And somewhere between 1445 and 1455. When he picked up almost 16 black slaves, they weren't slaves at that point, blacks off the coast of Africa. And he brought them back into the European theater. And he decided, what do I do with these people? And so he went to the Vatican in Italy and gave them to the Vatican. And why? Because see, the Catholics had a reputation at that time around the world as being the religion that was concerned about helping people that needed help. And then people that were classified as slaves to be their mediators, to bring comfort to them, their comforters. And so the Catholics, but at the same time, the Catholic was milking them, and milking them in the sense that whatever resources they had, or they could get out of them, they took it to the Catholic Church. That's where at that time they said all roads lead to Rome, because the Catholic is spread out all around the world. Catholic is going into the Middle East, they're going into Latin America, they're going into the Caribbean, and they were going there trying to pick up one thing that was extremely important: wealth. They wanted wealth. And the Vatican was loaded down with wealth, all kind of wealth, where we had gold this, gold that. But after Henry the Navigator gave those 16 blacks to the Vatican Church, the Vatican then said, we got to use these people. We use them as labor around the Vatican. And they used them for about 40-some years. And then about 1488, Pope Innocent came out and with a public edict that says, you know what, I got an idea that we no longer have to keep encouraging people to use Indians and primitive groups for slaves. There's another group of people that'll be better at providing labor than the Indians, who are weaker people. Let's use Africans, these blacks out of Africa. And he said up to this time, to be a slave, you had to be one of three things. One, you had to be a victim of religious persecution. Two, you have personal indebtedness to somebody, and they now say you owe me, and so now you're my property. And three, again, to be a POW, a prisoner of war.
Yes, sir.
And so Pope Innocent's public edict says, let's do it this way. Let's put those three things aside and say, here's a better group of people that you can use, not based on those three factors, but it's based on another fact. That's on their skin color, their complexion. This makes them highly recognizable. You can spot them any place, you know who they are. They can't just escape and run away. You can spot them in a minute and use them. And so he threw in the whole thing about skin color. Now that was 1488. But ironically, at the same time, Columbus was making these expositions into the Western world and going to different places, down in Haiti and down into the Caribbean islands. And finally, he says, you know, there's some land up around in here. I only saw a very few scattered people there, looked like Indians. This would be open land. I could use this. So he went back to England, went back to Spain, and he told the people, so, you know, I found a lot of vacant land with only a few people on it. And right now here in Europe, we are undergoing terrible conditions. We are overrun right now with crime, criminals, highwaymen robbing people, killing people on the roads. Right now, we got religious persecutions. We got famine where people are starving to death. They can't find enough food in the country. And we also got a lot of other problems that cannot be solved right now because we don't have enough land and money to do it. They said, what if we were to take and do two things? What if we were to put all that vacant land in the Western world up for grabs and say, now let's use these blacks and use them as labor. And they said, and that was about the late 1490s. So by 1502, they put those two together and came up with what you call capitalism. Capitalism is owning and controlling the land, the tools, the resources, and using other people's labor to enrich yourself and your business. That is capitalism.
Goodness gracious, and came from somebody named Pope Innocent. What
Yeah.
type of name is that for a motherfucker that would do something so evil? Pope Innocence, that's crazy. Well, there we have the definition of capitalism right there. So let me ask you another question.
Well, let me ask you one other point right
Yes,
quick?
sir.
The other point is that now, later on, about 1915, W.B. Du Bois tried to define capitalism. He came pretty close to saying the same thing.
Okay.
And it's much simpler the way he said it. He says that capitalism is simply just getting like having 3 to 4 ears of corn. He said, and you try to plant seeds and get the corn. You plant, you harvest, you sell, and you save the other seeds for next year's harvest. Make profit off. He said that's capitalism. Earning, savings, selling, and planting the seeds for next year.
There you go.
And that was in 1915 when Du Bois defined capitalism.
Like, what do you think is the best possible way for us to start to get to that point of generating black wealth?
Fine. What's the first thing we have to do is learn how to practice group economics and group politics. You see, and one of the two things that hurt us most during the slavery, and it had not been focused on. One was that our wealth was stolen from us. Black folk weren't poor people when they were slaves. They weren't holding their assets, but they had one thing was the most powerful, strongest, wealthy, valuable thing on earth. You know what that was?
No, sir.
Their labor. And see, and it's black labor. Nobody teaches black folks that. Your labor, that black labor was the most invaluable thing they could have. Because you see, when they set up this Constitution, they said all of the wealth of this nation is going to be embedded in what we're going to set up right now. And the first thing is land. We said, so the whole purpose of slavery should have been an issue for Martin Luther King and all of our leadership for the last 200 or 300 years. And the purpose of slavery was to what? Was to transfer, to maldistribute 100% of all this country's land, resources, business, gold, silver, chrome, magnesium, timber, and rights, privileges, and ownership and control of everything, and put it in the hands of the dominant white society. That was the purpose of slavery.
Okay, Dr. Claud, my next question to you then is there such thing as black capitalism?
Yes, there is.
And how's
that
defined?
operated?
Yes, sir.
What we have to do is go back and remember what I told you earlier, that the whole point of slavery was the maldistribution of all resources, period, into the hands of one group.
Yes, sir.
What you have to do is create a situation where you can call some of that money back, or you can start creating your own wealth, and you can start getting it through reparations, or you can get it through inheritance.
Okay, well, why do you think black people struggle in the system that's set up for us now? Why do you think that happens?
Because you don't own and control the land, the tools, the resources, and everything else. When land was given out in America during the slavery period, that immigration was an open policy for everybody around the world to come to this country and get resources except black folk. And during that period, first thing that George Washington said is that the wealth of this nation would be in the land. He said, I want 100,000 acres of free land. And Thomas Jefferson said, I want 100,000 acres of free land. And then after they heard that, Patrick Henry that says, give me life or give me death, he then said, well, then I want 65,000 acres of free land. And then, so consequently, during the period of slavery, during that from point 1 up to 3, up to 1862, that this country gave away 2 billion, B-I-L-L-I-O-N, okay, acres of free land, but it all went to whites, not to blacks. And see, and guess what? In all the land, and then the wealth of the nation was in that land, in gas, in oil, in timber, and iron, and coal, and minerals, and all that kind of stuff. Black folk couldn't get any land because the Dred Scott decision of 1857 says you have no rights to get any land. And so the liberal white congressman in the Republican Party, called the Radical Republicans, says we're going to correct that by creating a second constitution. And that's mean from 13 up to 15 will be a second constitution. This constitution, just like the first constitution from 1 through 12, amendments were strictly for whites, we're going to create another constitution, and following the Civil War, it's going to pick up 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment and the civil rights laws. And those 3 things or 4 things will be strictly for black people.
But they don't got no land in there, though. But no land in neither one of them amendments.
Some of your strongest senators stood up on the floor of the House of Representatives and the Senate says this: there's only 2 things that black folk can be in this country. You're either going to be slaves or you're going to be free. But to be free, minimally, you must have 40 acres, a mule, and $100.
Man, the only person that is operating on that is Spike Lee. He's the only one that got 40 acres and a mule. And that's just a production company. That's crazy. You know what, speaking of that, with it being such disparagement between black wealth and white capitalism and the way things are set up, there have been a lot of black people who have been successful. There are some black billionaires, and there are a lot of people who have, thrived in the system that has been set up that wasn't set up for us, rather. So why do you think we as black people are suspicious of those people?
Well, because of slavery itself. But during slavery, you have to remember this. We had, at the end of slavery, we had over 5 million blacks still enslaved in this country. And out of that 5 million blacks, we had at least about 6,000 blacks who had done very well under slavery. You know why? Because I told you what capitalism was. Get some land, control the tools, the land, the resources, and use other people's labor. And so so one of the first people in this country that started using black people's labor, you know who it was?
No, sir.
It was a black man from England.
Dirty, didn't he?
That's right. He came in, and he's the first one to start this thing about being a slave for the rest of your life. It was started by
slavery.
Yeah,
by a black man.
A black man from England.
This ain't
he started that. And
really?
Yeah, and so consequently, blacks started getting into getting a few land lots here and there, and they wanted to use black slaves too.
Wow. And
so consequently, out of about 6,200 some blacks who got wealth during slavery, they did extremely well. They would have been millionaires in today's terms. But
really?
So we always had some blacks that would sell you out, and also some who would just simply say, I'm gonna play this system to make ends meet. You got blacks right now in entertainment and also in sports. They're totally indifferent to the race matters. They don't care about the race matters. They just said, I'm gonna milk the system. I'm gonna buy me a lot of land. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna buy me a hotel. I'm gonna buy me a bar, or restaurant, and I'm not gonna deal in racism. Period. I'm not gonna get involved even in a discussion of racism. I'm just gonna operate a business and take as much money as I can and help my family and my own people, my own family. Period. So we always got blacks who have such a limited amount of self-interest as a group. They'll take their own people to the cleaners.
Yeah, well, all of England keeps sending all these actors over here. They need to send some reparations for that nigga that did that goof ass shit. Excuse my language, but can't believe that. And send all these dudes over here to play gangsters, and started chattel slavery. It was a black man from England. We don't want to hear no. All right, next question. That kind of got me upset. Now, with that being said, Dr. Claud, do you think black celebrities owe the community anything?
Yes, most definitely.
So what do you think they know? What are those things?
Because you see, everybody does that naturally and instinctively. Every group does that. Every group has a code of conduct. And see, we're the only people you can think of now, whether they have a religious background, orientation, or whether it's for ethnicity or culture. And we're the only people that lack a culture that says how you should be operating. See, right now, Chinese come to this country, they got a code.
It's a Chinatown in every city in America.
In Chinatown in every city, but you know, when I go to some of them, say, I want to say these, like some blacks wouldn't say, I want you to buy some of these cereals right here. We're selling them. We'll sell it to you at a discount. And the Chinese said, we don't want them. Sorry, we don't want any. They said, well, we'll give you a 25% discount off it. Same products you got on your shelf. They said, we're still not interested. And then the blacks would say, why aren't you interested in buying these products? I'm gonna give you a discount of 25 to 30% on it, and you still don't want it? They say, you black folk don't understand. It's not the price, it's not the money. It's a culture that we're raised to buy only from our own people. We'll only work for our own people. That's why the Wall Street Journal puts out a story saying, what Chinese say, we'll never hire any black folk. You're never gonna go to a Chinese restaurant or Chinese anything and find black folk working there. We only hire our own people. We only buy from our own people. We only support our own people. You black folk will buy from any and everybody.